The Pierre Hotel ballroom held 300 guests under chandeliers older than the country. The honorees' waltz had begun. Marlo Hastings sat alone at center parquet. The first CEO. I beg your pardon. The second. Another evening, perhaps. The third. I never learned to lead. Preston Hollister rose at table 3, lifted his champagne and spoke for the whole house. If Harlan Hastings were still standing, this gala would have been a very different evening. A few young men laughed. The laughter died fast. A blazer too loose at the shoulders moved from the back row toward her. 30 minutes earlier, Iris Wynne had taken her last bow on the same parquet floor she now could not see. She was 8 years old. She had danced the closing piece of the gala's adaptive youth showcase, partnered with a girl from her studio whose chair was newer than her own. Now Iris was in the children's lounge 2 floors up, eating sherbet with a chaperone, and her father was finishing a glass of lemon water in the parent row, planning to drive home before the main program ended. Owen Pruitt passed his chair without stopping, set one hand on Calder Wynne's shoulder, and was gone before Calder could turn his head. Marlo Hastings was the gala's honoree because 9 years earlier, on a clear autumn morning, the helicopter carrying her father from a Long Island airfield to a board meeting had broken apart over open water. The component report had been quiet. The funeral had been quieter. Harlan Hastings had built Hastings Avionics in 40 years. His daughter had taken the chair from a hospital bed 3 weeks after the crash and rebuilt the company in the 9 years since into something her father would have walked through carefully, not knowing whether to be proud or afraid. Her mother had left the family a year later for a house on a different coast. Marlo had stopped expecting anyone to sit beside her at functions long ago. The gala was meant to honor a contract she had signed for adaptive mobility research, a contract that funded 20 programs across the country. The waltz was a tradition 40 years older than she was. She had not asked for it. Sterling Vance sat at the head table. He lifted 2 fingers an inch off the linen. The first CEO approached. The first CEO declined. Vance did not blink. The second. The third. Owen, watching from the security station near the kitchen door, tightened his grip on the radio in his palm. He did not lift it. His contract with the venue forbade public intervention. His non-disclosure with the foundation forbade naming what he could not stop. Preston Hollister rose at table 3. He had been seated 4 feet from Marlo by the same protocol officer who had drawn up Vance's table chart. He had been told he would have the floor for 1 minute if he wanted it. He took the minute. The line about her father was the one he had rehearsed in the car. It did what it was meant to do. The laughter from a few young men at his table tried to follow and could not. Marlo did not lower her head. She looked through Preston as though he were a piece of furniture she had been considering replacing. The room read the look. The room did not move. Owen stepped 1 foot away from his post. From the parent row, Calder met his eye. Owen nodded. Calder Wynne was 40. The blazer he wore had been borrowed from a neighbor who fixed boilers for a living. He set the glass of lemon water on the empty chair beside him. He removed the small adhesive name tag from his lapel, the one printed with the words, Guest, Youth Showcase Parent, and folded it in half and placed it on the seat under the glass. He walked across the parquet. He did not hurry. He did not slow. The orchestra had stopped between phrases and not started again. He stopped a respectful distance from her chair. "Ma'am," he said, "may I have this dance?" She looked at him long enough that the room turned to look with her. Then she nodded. He set his right hand lightly on the back rail of her chair and offered his left. A young man at the sound table, a kid who had been hired for the night and had no instructions for this, slid the cue toward the start of the track. The strings came in clean. Calder did not pull her into the dance. He built it around the chair. He took the chair as the axis and moved through it, around it, against it, his line traveling along hers and not across. His shoulders carried the count. His left hand stayed gentle inside her right. Across the room, at the honored guest table, where Dr. Helena Marsden had been seated to receive a Lifetime Achievement Medal, she was no longer certain she wanted. The older woman set down her glass. She put both hands on the head of her cane and pushed herself upright with the slow effort of someone who had not stood in public for 3 years. The aide beside her reached for her elbow. Helena waved her off without taking her eyes from the parquet. She had trained 3 people on the continent to do what the man in the borrowed blazer was doing. One was dead. One was retired in Oregon. The third she had never met in person. In the first 8 measures, Calder's right hand drifted from the chair rail down along Marlowe's spine through the thin fabric of her gown. His fingertips moved like a man turning the page of a book he had read before. He felt it at T11-12, a small rotation, 4 millimeters, 8 degrees off axis. A fixation the imaging would have missed because the imaging would have been taken with her body in a position no living spine settles into. He felt lower, found the path of the sciatic root, felt the residual signal that should not, according to 11 specialists, have been there at all. He brought his head a quarter-inch closer to hers. "You have an incomplete injury," he said, just under his breath. 11 specialists missed a rotational fixation. "The protocol you are on can carry you further than they told you." She kept dancing. Her face did not change. 11 hospitals said. 11 hospitals didn't dance with you. He applied pressure with the flat of his palm at the base of her thoracic spine and let it ride out on the next breath. It was not violent. It was the length of a held note. Marlowe felt warmth pass down her left thigh. Heat she had been told for 6 years was a phantom signal, a memory of a leg. She did not speak. Her eyes opened wider. The leather cord around his neck slipped out from under the blazer's collar when he leaned. The small Polaroid hung visible for 2 seconds. Helena Marsden, 2 meters off, saw it. The track ended. He brought her chair back to its center mark with a courtesy turn that wasted no motion. He stepped back. He bowed his head once. Helena crossed the parquet on her cane. She looked at his hands. She looked at the leather cord. "You're him," she said. Her voice carried 2 tables. "You're Calder Wynne, Mara's husband, the author of the method." Marlowe Hastings did not breathe for 2 seconds. The Wynne method was the protocol on which she had based 6 years of her own recovery. She had read the papers. She had assumed the surname belonged to a research collective. She did not say thank you. She did not need the room to see her as a woman who had been rescued. She closed her fingers around his for 1 second. He gave back nothing visible. Vance stood while the applause was still scattered. He walked out through the side hall into the corridor with a phone already at his ear. The corridor door swung most of the way shut. "Move the vote up." 48 hours. The door closed. Preston Hollister sat at table 3. No one at his table looked at him. By 6 the next morning, the light over the train tracks in Mount Vernon had that flat winter color that turned every tree into a wire diagram. Calder ground coffee at the counter in the kitchen of the small 1-story house behind his studio. Iris sat at the table in pajamas patterned with foxes. "The lady was nice," she said, halfway through a piece of toast. "What lady?" "The one you danced with. She didn't talk to me, but she looked at me before she left. She had good shoulders." Mama would have said that. Calder set the coffee in front of his own chair and did not sit down yet. "Eat your eggs." Iris ate her eggs. The phone on the counter buzzed once at 6:48. The number was not in his contacts. He let it ring out. It buzzed again at 6:50. He answered without speaking. "Mr. Wynne," Marlowe Hastings said, "I have read everything you published between 2012 and last spring. I would like to meet today. My office. 11. He looked at Iris. He looked at the phone. "I have a patient at 10, he said. "I can be there at 1. 1. She did not say goodbye. Owen called 12 minutes later from the parking lot of his daughter's school. "Go," he said. "She doesn't need a consultant. She needs to see what kind of man you are when no one is watching." Calder did not answer. "Go," Owen said again, and ended the call. The Hastings Avionics Tower rose 41 stories of glass over Park Avenue. The conference room into which an assistant led him at 1 was not Marlowe Hastings' office. It was a private room 2 floors below, with no windows and a single table. Marlowe was already at the table. She did not extend her hand. The wheelchair was not the chair from the gala. This one was lighter. She did not thank him for the gala. He had not expected her to. 3 things, she said. 1. New imaging. Custom positioning. Your protocol. 2. A personal course of the Wynne method. 2 sessions a week, for as long as you can give me. 3. A 5-year research collaboration between your studio and the Hastings Foundation. Funding open, direction yours. He let the silence sit a moment. 1 and 2, yes, he said. 3, no. She waited. My wife taught most of what you would be funding, he said. I won't watch what she built turn into corporate program material. It was the first time he had said Mara's name to her. He had not said it the night before. He had not said it on the phone. Marlowe did not ask what he meant. She watched his hands on the edge of the table. All right. He stood. He did not extend his hand because she was not extending hers. At the door, he paused for a fraction of a second to let the latch settle. Behind him, she said, "I didn't call because I recognized you last night." He stopped, his hand on the door. "I called because I needed to know who you are when no one is watching." He did not turn around. He opened the door and walked out. In the lobby, a man with an earpiece looked up from a clipboard and held his eye for 2 beats. The man was Sterling Vance's chief of staff. Calder kept walking. The revolving door turned him out into the cold. He drove back to Mount Vernon and was at the studio in time for his 3 o'clock patient. The patient was a girl of 11 with a partial brachial plexus injury. He worked. He did not think about the conference room until midnight. The new imaging was done 3 days later at a private facility uptown. Calder sent in a 1-page positioning sheet the day before. The radiologist who ran the films called him at 7 that evening and asked him twice if he was certain about the angles. He was. The films came back at 9 the next morning. 4 millimeters of rotational displacement at T11 on 12, 8 degrees axial twist, a residual band of sensation, partial, asymmetric, in the L4 through sewn dermatomes on the left side. 2 of those dermatomes had been written off as cortical reorganization 7 years earlier. The reading neurologist on the new film, a woman Marlowe had never met, wrote one line at the bottom of her report, "Suggest reassessment of ASIA classification." Marlowe began coming to Mount Vernon 2 days a week. She came through the service alley on the south side of the studio. In a plain sedan Owen had arranged through a friend, on a schedule that did not appear on any calendar in the Hastings Tower. The studio was a 1-story converted print shop on a side street. The ramp was wood. The paint on the door was the green Mara had picked out the summer before she got too tired to paint. A hand-lettered sign above the entrance read "Wind Movement." There were 3 rooms inside. The front room had a wood floor, 2 mirrors, a bar at chair height, parallel bars at 3 different heights, and a wall of mats. The back rooms were a small office and a smaller equipment closet. When Marlowe came in for her first session, a veteran in his late 30s was using the parallel bars. His left leg had been rebuilt below the knee after an IED in Helmand. He nodded to her without surprise, the way a man nods to another patient. Calder waited until the veteran finished his set, walked him to the door, and shook his hand. He came back wiping his hands on a clean towel. "Lie down," he said. "Face up first. I want to see what you do when you breathe." There was no consulting room. There was no front desk. There was no music playing. Iris came in after school on Tuesday and saw the silver sedan in the alley. She did not ask. At dinner she said, "The lady comes here twice a week now." "Yes. Why doesn't she come in the house?" "Because this is the place I work, Bug." Iris accepted that the way Iris accepted most things, which was to put it next to her plate and consider it while she ate. In the Hastings Tower, Sterling Vance was the kind of man who watched security footage the way other men read the weather. He noticed the sedan on Tuesday. He had a junior aide run the plate on Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, Marlowe's general counsel was on the phone with him for 40 minutes about something called conflict of interest in connection with the Hastings Foundation's research grants. On Friday morning, Calder received a letter via courier. The letter was on counsel's letterhead. It informed him that he had been named in a procedural review and that he was to make himself available for a deposition the following week. He folded the letter twice. He set it on the small office desk under his coffee cup. He did not call Marlowe. That evening, Iris asked again why the lady did not come in. He gave her the same answer he had given her on Tuesday. He let her watch a cooking program until she fell asleep on the couch and carried her up to bed. He sat in the front room of the studio in the dark and looked at the wall where Mara had once written, in pencil that had never been painted over, the 4 words, "The body remembers everything." He went to the Hastings Tower on Wednesday of the 2nd week. The session was scheduled for 10:30 in the private gym on the 37th floor. The assistant who normally met him at the elevator was not there. Another assistant, younger, apologized and said Miss Hastings was wrapping up a call. He could wait in the small lounge. The lounge shared a wall with a conference room. The door of the conference room was a fraction open. Calder did not move. He did not look up. He let the words come in. Sterling Vance's voice was the easiest to make out. He was speaking the way men speak when they are walking around an idea they have already accepted. "The optics speak for themselves," Vance said. Her own industry would not stand up for her 4 weeks ago. 3 of the strongest CEOs in this country, declined to dance with her in a room of 300 peers. This is not a personal matter. The board's fiduciary responsibility, a second voice, older, less certain. Sterling, the public reading of that night was not exactly. The public reading is a sideshow. The room was the room. The room did not move. A third voice. What about the staff member who did dance with her? Vance laughed once. It was a small, dry sound. I'm sure we can find a use for that footage. Calder did not move. The door opened down the hall. Marlowe came around the corner in her chair, slightly fast, and stopped when she saw his face. He was looking past her at the wall. He had not turned his head. She did not apologize. She did not explain. Are we ready? She said. He stood. In the private gym, he worked her through the warm-up. She was tighter than she had been on Friday. The fascia on her left hip ratcheted under his hand the way a winch does when the cable has been overloaded once and is preparing to be overloaded again. He took the session slow. He talked her through the breath. He did not mention what he had heard. At the end, lying face up on the mat with her eyes closed, she put her right hand over her face, and her shoulders moved twice, very quietly, and the breath did not come back even for half a count. He did not put his hand on her shoulder. He did not say it was all right. He stood up, went to the cabinet, took a clean folded towel, and laid it on the bench beside her head. He stepped back 2 paces and waited until she had her breath. Then he stepped out of the room and closed the door behind him. He took the elevator down 40 floors without stopping. That night, Owen Pruitt parked his pickup in front of the studio at 20 minutes past 9 without calling first. The studio's interior lights were off. The kitchen light in the small house behind it was on. Owen came around the back, knocked on the kitchen door, and Calder let him in. Owen did not take the coffee Calder offered him. He sat down at the table and put both hands flat on it. You need to know something, he said, about Mara, and about Vance. I worked through it over the weekend. Calder waited. He had a board seat at the helicopter manufacturer in 2017, Owen said. The component that failed on Harlan Hastings' aircraft was theirs. There was an FAA preliminary report. It was filed. Then it disappeared. I have a friend at the FAA who kept his own copy. He took a folder from inside his coat and put it on the table. The Hastings Foundation kept its archive in a sub-basement of the Hastings Tower, in a low-ceilinged room with 12 filing cabinets and an air handler that ran constantly. Addie Lynn had worked the archive for 2 years. She was 26. She wore the same gray cardigan 4 days a week and ate her lunch at the small table next to the metal shelving. Almost nobody at the tower remembered her name. Owen had asked her in October to audit the Foundation's gala history files. He had told her he was preparing a routine retrospective. She had taken him at his word. On the 3rd week of the audit, she opened a banker's box labeled in pencil with the year 2016 and a string of numerical codes. The box contained a stack of honoraria vouchers, a thin spiral notebook, and a printed list of consulting engagements paid quarterly out of the Foundation's discretionary fund. The list had a single name down its left margin, repeated 27 times over 24 months. Mara Wynn. The category was always the same. Adaptive Partnered Movement Consulting. The client field was always the same. M. Hastings. Addie did not know who Calder Wynn was. She did not know the small Polaroid hanging from a leather cord that had slipped out of a man's collar 3 weeks earlier at the Pierre Hotel. She wrote up the find as a 1-page memo and emailed it to Owen on Friday afternoon. Owen read it at his daughter's volleyball practice. He stood up in the middle of the second set and walked out to the parking lot. He called Calder. He did not get him. He called Marlowe's private line. He came up to the penthouse Saturday morning with the box on his shoulder and the notebook in his coat pocket. Marlowe took the box. She sat with it on her lap for a moment without opening it. Then she opened it. The notebook was the size of a paperback novel. Spiral bound at the top. The cover dark green. The handwriting inside was small and slanted slightly forward, ruler straight across the unlined pages, with notes in the margins in the same hand. Marlowe turned the pages slowly. Patient MH, Session 8. Stood 14 seconds with single-hand support. Hip alignment improving on the right. Left side still locked at iliac. Suggest pelvic clock on Wednesday. She turned the page. Patient MH, Session 12. Patient asked today if she will ever dance again. I told her yes. The lead will be different. But that's still dancing. The first 18 months after the crash were a fog in her memory. She had been told by a psychiatrist she had stopped seeing in 2020 that she had filed the early recovery away because the gap between what her body could do and what she remembered her body doing had been more than she could metabolize in real time. She had accepted the diagnosis. She had moved on. She had retained that there had been an early adaptive movement coach, a woman, kind, who had worked her through the months when she could not bear to look down past her ribs. The woman's name had been written on no document she had kept. The woman had been, in her memory, a series of warm hands and a calm voice in a room she had not wanted to be in. The woman's name was Mara Wynne. Marlo sat with the notebook open on her lap for 30 minutes without speaking. Owen stood by the window. The traffic on Park Avenue moved 9 floors below. Finally, Marlo lifted her head. "Bring it to him," she said. "Tell him it's his. Tell him I'm sorry I didn't remember." She did not call ahead. She came to Mount Vernon on Sunday afternoon, the same sedan, the same alley, an hour earlier than her usual session day. Calder opened the studio door for her himself. He had been waiting since Owen had called him on Saturday night. Inside the small house behind the studio, Iris was in the front room with her substitute teacher. They were working through a book about ocean animals. Iris looked up when Marlo came in, said hello in the same polite voice she used with all of her father's visitors, and went back to a paragraph about a kind of squid that lit up when it was scared. Calder led Marlo to the back room of the house that served as his small office. He pulled out the chair on her side of the table. She moved herself across from her wheelchair to the chair and back along the table edge under her own power. He sat down. He laid his hands flat on the table. The left one was not entirely steady. He had read the notebook through twice the night before. He had recognized Mara's handwriting on the first page. He had not slept after that. She was diagnosed at 29, he said. MS. Relapsing, remitting at first. She kept teaching for 4 more years. She didn't tell her clients. She didn't want to be carried at work. The foundation engagement started in the summer of 2016. By the end of 2018, she couldn't safely lift or transfer anymore. She finished out the last clients she had in her own studio. "You were one of the last." Marlo did not interrupt. She didn't talk about her clients at home. She said that was their privacy. "I knew there was a woman in Manhattan she was driving in for. I knew the woman had been injured in a helicopter crash. I did not know which woman." Marlo's eyes had filled. The water ran. She did not lift her hand to her face. "I would not have approached you at the gala if I had known," he said. "I would have stepped away." She shook her head once. "You should have approached me at the gala," she said quietly. "She would have told you to." He looked at his hands. Iris came to the door of the back office. She had her mother's small canvas wallet in her hand. She did not knock. She walked in and stood at the corner of the table. "Daddy," she said, "I want to show the lady something." He nodded. She opened the wallet. Inside was a Polaroid the size of a credit card, slightly faded at the corners. A woman in a leotard and dance pants stood in a sunlit studio next to a woman in a wheelchair. The woman in the wheelchair had darker hair than Marlo wore now, and was thinner, but the angle of the jaw was unmistakable. "This one is Mama," Iris said, pointing. "This one looks like the lady from the party. Is that the same lady?" Calder did not nod. Marlo did not nod. Iris set the Polaroid down on the table between their 2 hands. "Okay," Iris said. She turned and walked back to the front room to her ocean book. The Polaroid lay flat on the table. Their 2 hands lay flat on either side of it. Neither moved, neither touched the photograph. In the Hastings Tower at the same hour, Sterling Vance closed his office door. He put through a call to the corporate secretary. He moved the special board meeting to Wednesday morning. He sent the agenda to Preston Hollister's father at home. The agenda had Preston's name listed as concerned shareholder witness. Preston did not yet know what he was afraid of. Wednesday morning, the boardroom on the 45th floor of the Hastings Avionics Tower received its 11 members at the table and 4 witnesses along the wall. Marlo came in her chair. She did not bring a cane. She had stood for 28 seconds at her Tuesday session, and Calder had told her not to show it. She had nodded. Sterling Vance opened. He spoke for 22 minutes. His tone was the tone he used when he was sorry about something. He laid out the case for a fitness to govern review as a matter of fiduciary discipline. He named the gala, gently, twice. He did not look at Preston Hollister, who sat against the wall with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the carpet. Marlo waited until Vance was finished. She did not gather her papers. She had none. "Before we move to discussion," she said, "I would like to bring in a witness." She nodded to the corporate secretary. The secretary opened the side door. Calder came in. He wore the same work coat he wore at the studio. He did not look at the table. He looked at Marlowe. He set a brown manila folder on the open space in front of her, walked 4 steps back, and stopped against the wall opposite Preston. Marlowe opened the folder. 3 items, she said. She set them out one at a time. The first was the new imaging report, and a 1-page summary signed by 2 specialists from outside the Hastings Foundation network. It documented an incomplete spinal cord injury and a treatable rotational fixation that had been missed for 9 years. It documented measurable functional improvement over the past 4 weeks. The second was a copy of an FAA preliminary investigation from 2017. The original had vanished from the public record within 60 days of filing. Owen Pruitt had obtained a clean copy from a retired archivist in Oklahoma City. The investigation named the component manufacturer responsible for the failure that had brought down Harlan Hastings' aircraft. The third was a board membership disclosure. Sterling Vance had held a director's seat on that manufacturer's board during the 2 years preceding the crash. Preston Hollister's family company, Hollister Defense Systems, had held a separate seat on the same board over the same period. Vance's expression held for 1 second and then was gone. Preston Hollister stood up against the wall. He did not look at Vance. He did not look at Marlowe. He walked out of the boardroom by the side door before the secretary could close it. He was not seen at Hollister Defense Systems again that quarter. Marlowe did not raise her voice. "The question," she said to the table, "is not whether I am fit to run my father's company. The question is why a member of this board concealed information that directly contributed to my father's death, and why a young CEO from a peer firm stood up in the middle of my own gala 4 weeks ago to clear the path for the man who concealed it." The vote on the fitness motion was withdrawn. Vance was placed on administrative leave. By the end of the week, the SEC had opened a preliminary inquiry. By the following Tuesday, Hollister Defense Systems had asked Preston for his resignation. The room emptied. Marlowe and Calder were left at the long table. He had not sat down. She did not thank him. He did not accept her not thanking him. "I'm sorry I didn't remember her," she said. "She didn't need to be remembered," he said. "She needed the work to keep going." He took the folder. He walked out of the boardroom the way he had walked in. 10 days after the board meeting, the trade press had carried 2 short paragraphs about Sterling Vance's leave and 3 lines about Preston Hollister's resignation. Neither story mentioned the gala. Nobody at Hastings Avionics raised the subject in a meeting. The stock moved sideways for a week and then went back to climbing. On Saturday afternoon, Marlowe came to Mount Vernon without an appointment. She came in her own car this time, a small electric coupe she could drive with hand controls she had not used in 6 months. She parked in front of the studio. Iris was in the backyard with 2 neighbor children, building a structure out of fallen branches, whose purpose nobody could quite name. Calder was on the porch step with a hammer and a small can of nails, fixing the loose board on the wooden ramp. He looked up when she pulled in. He did not stand. He set the hammer down on the step. She came around the car in the chair. He had built the ramp himself the year Mara was diagnosed. It still held. She came up onto the porch and parked the chair next to his step. He brought 2 mugs of coffee out. They drank in silence for a minute. "Could I read it?" she said. "The whole thing. Not just the entries about me." He went inside. He came back with the green spiral notebook. He set it on the porch step between them. "She wrote it for you," he said. "You just didn't know." Marlowe held the notebook on her lap without opening it. They talked about the method then, slowly, the way 2 people talk who have decided not to rush. They talked about what an independent foundation would look like, about training, about scholarships, about whether a clinic in Detroit could be staffed without compromising the protocol. She listened more than she spoke. He spoke more than he had spoken in any single conversation since Mara had died. She told him then, in the same flat voice she had used in the conference room 4 weeks earlier, that she had funded the youth adaptive dance program at the studio anonymously for 2.5 years. She had not known whose studio it was. She had given because a friend's child had needed something like it once, and her friend had not been able to find it. He set his coffee down on the step. He looked at the backyard. Iris was lifting a long branch over her head and laughing about something nobody on the porch could hear. 2.5 years, he said. 2.5 years. He did not say anything else for a while. "That's the program she's in," he said finally. "I know that now." They sat with it. 2 lives that had run parallel for 8 years without crossing, holding each other up from a distance neither had been able to see across. Iris came running up the porch steps with twigs in her hair. She stopped at the top. "Are you eating with us?" she said to Marlowe. Marlowe looked at Calder. He did not say anything. "Yes," Marlowe said to Iris. "If your dad doesn't mind." "He doesn't mind," Iris said, which was the kind of thing Iris said. She went back into the house to tell her substitute teacher, who was staying for dinner, that there would be one more. Calder picked up the hammer. He hit one nail. "You drove yourself," he said. "I did. Hand controls." "Yes." He hit the nail 2 more times. The board was tight. She did not say what she could not yet say. Neither did he. It was late by the time the dishes were done. Iris had fallen asleep on the rug in the front room of the house an hour earlier with a book about ocean animals open across her chest. Calder had carried her once across the backyard to the studio, laid her on the folded floor mat in the corner under his own work coat, and let her sleep through. She liked sleeping in the studio. She had since she was 4. The substitute teacher had left at 7. The neighbor children had gone home before dark. Marlowe had not asked to leave. Calder had not asked her to. He stood up from the small table in the studio's office, turned out the overhead light, and left the work lamp on at the back wall. He went to the shelf above the small portable speaker on the windowsill and put on the record without looking at it. He had played the same record so many times he did not need to look. The voice that came in was Nina Simone, half a century old, singing a song about not knowing what time it was anymore. He walked across the studio floor. He stopped in front of her wheelchair. He held out his hand. She looked at his hand. She put hers in it. She pushed up onto her feet with her right hand on his and her left on the chair arm. She stood. She did not wobble. She let go of the chair arm. She brought her left hand up to his shoulder. 1 step. She took it on her right foot. The foot landed. 2. The left came forward. It was slow. The foot landed. 3. Right. 4. Left. On the 5th she swayed. He took her weight under her elbow without breaking the frame of the dance, lifted her by the smallest amount, set her down half a step over and a half step forward, and the count went on. He was not leading her. He was walking with her. There was no parquet, no orchestra, no DJ, no 300 guests. There was the worn pine floor of the studio Mara had picked the paint for, and a wheelchair pushed against the wall, and 2 hands. They turned, slow and broken and small, and turned again. She lowered her forehead to his shoulder. He did not move. The song ended. The next song began. Neither of them counted. Iris turned in her sleep on the mat. She did not wake. After a long time, Marlowe spoke for the first time, very softly. "Calder." He did not move. "I know," he said. He did not look down at her. He did not need to. The work lamp at the back wall cast their 2 shadows long across the wood floor, and the shadows were holding each other up. The way they had been holding each other up for 8 years, from 2 different rooms in 2 different cities, without knowing either room existed. When the second song ended, he brought her back to the chair, slow and careful, with the same economy he had used in the ballroom 4 weeks earlier. He helped her sit. He stood with his hand on the back rail of the chair for a moment. He turned out the work lamp. He walked her chair to the door. He opened the door for her. The night outside the studio smelled like a coming frost. She did not say good night. He did not say good night. She drove herself home. The first dance had been for everyone. This one was only for them.